If you've ever built something from the ground up, you'd know what it feels like to lose sight of why you started. The meetings stack up, the metrics take over, the brand that once felt alive starts to feel more like a system you're keeping afloat. And you tell yourself you're just tired, but deep down you know it's something bigger. You've drifted from the mission that used to drive you. Today I want to help you find your way back, not to a marketing plan or a set of goals, but to the story that made you want to lead in the first place. Mission drift. Mission drift doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow fade. A dozen small compromises made in the name of growth, deadlines, or just survival. And then one day you look up and the work still matters, but it doesn't mean what it used to. And that loss of meaning has a cost. It shows up in your energy, in your leadership, and your culture. People start following direction and not vision. But the truth is, your vision didn't just disappear. It got buried under layers of responsibility, expectation, and just noise. Every brand starts with one person's story, yours. It's easy to forget that when the business grows, but your story is still the anchor that holds everything together. There's a reason you see brands that are thriving even when the market shifts or strategy changes. It's because their purpose isn't built on trend or convenience. It's built on an identity. And when the leaders reconnect to that origin story, they rediscover the same fuel that built their success in the first place. And when that happens, the entire organization begins to feel the shift. Culture follows clarity. So let's start here. Before your career even began, what was an experience or a lesson that shaped who you are? Something that became one of your secret advantages in how you lead, create, or solve problems. For some, it's a moment from childhood, watching a parent build something from nothing. For others, it's the first client who actually trusted them when they barely had a business. Or maybe it's a failure that forced them to figure out what really matters. These stories aren't just personal memories. They're the why behind the brand you built. And when you take time to name them again, you don't just remember who you were. You remember who you wanted to become. That's the heart of brand vision. Once you reconnect with that story, you can begin to rebuild around it. Here's how. Refine your narrative. Write your origin story again, as if you were telling it to your team for the first time. Be honest about the struggle, not just the success. People really follow authenticity much more than polish. Revisit your values. Ask yourself which values have been constant since the beginning, and which ones have drifted a little bit. Alignment doesn't come from inventing new values. It comes from returning to the ones that built your foundation in the first place. And reignite your vision. Define what impact you want this brand to make now and in the future. Not just in revenue or growth, but people's lives, your clients, your team, your community, yourself. So now that you've identified these three elements, your origin, your insight, and your impact, these are the heartbeat of your story. But the question most people still get stuck on is, how do I turn that into something real? Something I can actually share with my team, or even just remind myself why I started this whole thing in the first place. I mean, I'm not a storyteller. Well, the truth is, you actually are a good storyteller. You've just never really thought about it the right way. So I want you to imagine this. You're sitting with a small group of close friends, maybe over coffee or dinner, and the conversation turns to work. And then one of them turns and looks at you and asks, "So what made you start your business?" They're not asking because they're networking or trying to compare notes. They genuinely want to know. They want to understand what drives you. What do you say? Take a moment to really picture this. It's not a sales pitch or trying to come up with a perfect tagline. This is your honest answer to one of your best friends about why you started this. Maybe you start your response with something like, it actually started when, and you let yourself go back to that moment, right? Maybe it was some lesson given to you by a grandparent when you were just a teenager. And that stuck with you until you recognized an opportunity. Maybe there was a challenge, a frustration, or a realization that something needed to change. You see, what you're doing in that moment, without even realizing it, is the essence of storytelling. You're not trying to sell your business. You're helping somebody else understand it. And every great story, whether it's Pixar, Nike, or your local bakery that everyone loves, follows the same natural rhythm. It starts with the spark, the moment something shifted. What did you see or experience that made you realize there's a better way? Then there's the struggle. What did it take to bring that idea to life? What challenge did you have to overcome? And finally, the shift. How has that changed not just your life, but the people you serve? These 3 stages are a simplified version of what storytellers call the hero's journey. It's one of the oldest frameworks in human history because it mirrors how we actually make meaning out of our lived experiences. So when you look at your brand through that lens, you stop thinking about it as a company or a product. You start to see it as a journey. The spark becomes your why, the reason you couldn't ignore this problem anymore. The struggle becomes your credibility, proof that you've lived what you teach. And the shift becomes your promise. That's what happens when people engage with your brand. Together, these form what I call your brand origin story, the personal truth that gives your brand its heartbeat. And here's the key. This isn't some story you make up to impress your audience. It's just one that you remember about what connects you to your work, your customers, yourself, your team, and the purpose that drives every decision you make. So take an hour sometime this week to write these 3 elements out, keeping in mind this imaginary conversation you had with your friends. Use that to help you identify the spark. What moment made you start your business? The struggle. What challenge shaped how you serve others? And the shift? It's what change do you want your work to create in people's lives? Your answers become the foundation of your brand origin story, and building from that is one of the most powerful ways to create a brand that is grounded in a meaningful message. So if you've been feeling a little burnt out, maybe this is your reminder that you don't need a new direction. You don't need to rebrand. You need to remember what mattered most. Every leader goes through this at some level. The moment when the brand becomes bigger than the story that started it. But the ones who find their way back to that origin, they lead differently. They're leading with conviction again, and their brands start to feel alive again. And when a brand feels alive, it doesn't just change the business. It changes the people inside it and the community around it. So as soon as you have the opportunity, take that hour to write that story again and look back before all the numbers and meetings and all the noise. Find that moment that still moves you, because that's where your next chapter begins. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how we take this and build an unforgettable brand.